part 3 of What's in a Name. I have been in this voidscape less than a full handful of times in my life. The first time being the day I had first met the Morgan, and on 3 other occasions were brushes with death. An inherent risk to those who are blade singers, experiment with magic, or treat those with contagious illnesses. I was overwhelmed by the insecurities, regret, guilt, and uncertainties I had accumulated over the centuries. And one by one, I sorted through them, laughing, raging, or crying in turn, eventually coming to terms with the outcome, or in some cases accepting that some would remain unresolved and others still needed to be addressed. While this was going on within my psyche, outwardly several things happened physically as well. The very coloration of my body that signified the vitality of life had faded into corresponding shades of light and dark gray, with only the barest trace of color as the Morgan's signature shadow quintessence suffused my form. But it was not the only mystical energy within me. The shadow quintessence tried to extinguish or absorb weird within me, but to no avail. Eventually, my body's coloration was restored. Hints of orange, yellow, green, and copper that reflected the autumn season was visible in my skin complexion once more, although I had a decidedly ashen undertone. The Morgan's life-sapping energy had not been expelled either. Instead, it had been converted to a self-replenishing wellspring I could draw upon to augment my own eldritch power. And I relived an old memory of watching a water sprite meld into the water of a fountain and become water. But the image had the faint haze of a dream. I blinked and rubbed my eyes with my thumb and index finger to clear away the blurriness and pushed myself up to my feet. The Morgan nodded approvingly as I straightened and looked around. The dead plant suddenly had a sharp contrast. Although much of the plant life looked as if it died years ago, I somehow knew it had only been about a week. You did this? I stammered, but I knew the answer, and my gaze was drawn to a pool of congealed blood and an unexplainable insight as to its origins that confirmed Curie's claim about a sacrificial unicorn had not been morbid speculation. Some of my followers were inspired, and in light of my recent pursuits, they received my blessing. Morgan answered as she reached up to remove the mask covering her face to reveal the flawless alabaster complexion of a high elf. Her eyes were still bright crimson, but no longer glowed. When she brought her mask up to place it over my face, I reached over and clasped her hand, just as I had done once before as a child, in order to stop her from walking into a drow's pit trap. I have a few questions, please. First, how long am I to serve? The Morgan lowered the mask to her side and stared silently. This is a contract, yes. I should understand and agree to the terms. I feel the uncomfortable silence. So you can find a way to finagle out of the terms, the Phantom Queen replied. Do you expect any less from a fae? Besides, I wouldn't be a very good crow if I didn't take the shiny object you're offering and hide it to use later. I gestured to the mask for emphasis, and the Sovereign of Corvid smiled. The sweet taste of weird born from her amusement was a pleasant shift from the bland facade of indifference she had been projecting. Over the course of my tenure as her vassal, I would find that her range of emotions were not stunted by obsessions as some of Everent's other divinities, but she was very guarded about being manipulated through emotional extremes. 100 years unless you are elevated, at which time terms are renegotiated, or I release you, and thus it ends. What are my responsibilities and obligations as a harbinger? As a physician and renowned blade singer, you can already exercise influence over life or death with other sentient beings. As my harbinger, you shall continue to do so, but now you have an unerring sense for when someone is about to transition. I was thinking I could craft some magical items for you or some of your favorite mortal worshippers instead, I said in an offhand manner. Once again, she stared at me appraisingly and eventually stopped to study the sword sheathed at my left hip. That will be a transaction of a different nature and terms. The Phantom Queen replied. You want me to be a Soul Reaper, Your Majesty? I queried after she declined my suggestion. You are not empowered to innately know how or to whom a soul is to be distributed outside of your personal dealings, the Phantom Queen said in a firm tone. You will go where you are called and may decide to influence whether or not they live or die using your own abilities. If your intercession means death, you or your associate or minion will bring them to me through this threshold that is intended for you to enter the Shadow Barrens. She waved her right hand in an arc to indicate the dying woods. You may use other means of entering the Shadow Barrens and will be recognized as my harbinger, with all the attendant risks and rewards that accompany the responsibilities and associations. But you are the guardian of this threshold and may style yourself with the tenurial trappings of your preference. Your word is law, and your will is reflected here, subordinate only to me as part of my domain. I really can't convince you that I would be ill-suited to harbingering for you, can I, Your Majesty? Your skills as herald are already noted throughout Everin and our respective mirror realms. What if I decline? I smiled cheerfully. It was stated as a question, but I knew the truth in my being. She had set the framework for this centuries ago. I incurred a debt, and my payment is now due. It is time for you to embrace the inevitable, Stormcrow. The Morgan replied simply. As you wish, Your Majesty. I drew in intake of air, stepped closer to her, and wrapped my arms around her in a hug. The Sovereign of Corvitz was taken aback by my mixture of emotions, including excitement, nervousness, and joy took the form of a warm breeze. She awkwardly hugged me back until I politely disengaged after a few moments. I tasted another sliver of her amusement. Sampaket. I stated formal acceptance of the deal in Sylvan. The frost flared with blue-white light and melted away to leave behind a ring of green grass. Is that all for now? Far from it, Stormcrow. The Morgan brought the porcelain mask up and lined it along the top of my forehead and slid it down to a line over my face. The cold-worked stonework shifted to affix itself to fit perfectly. I looked up and down quickly, did a front flip, a running leap, and a handstand, but the mask remained in place. Moments later, I felt sweat trickling down my forehead. Am I permitted to remove the mask to examine it? Yes, you need only wear it when acting on my behalf, the Sovereign of Corvitz replied. I immediately remove it and extract a handkerchief from my component pouch to wipe away the sweat. Forgive me, I am not making light of this, but masks have never been an accessory I've been overly fond of wearing.